Hello there, and welcome to another Bobeats synth review, and today we're checking out the Modal Electronics Element One. And a big thank you to Modal for sending over the Element One so I could make this video for you all. So the Element One is a digital 8-voice synthesizer aimed at musicians who want an easy-to-understand synthesizer. And yes, in many ways the Element One is a Cobalt 8 with a new hardware design. Gone is the somewhat overwhelming amount of knobs and shift functions that were on the Argon, Cobalt and Carbon, and it's replaced by a much more elegant design by Axel Hartmann. You have probably seen, if not owned, some of the synths that Axel has designed before. The positive with the new design is that it's much easier to understand the synthesizer and to tweak the sounds while playing. But everything comes at a cost, so the simplified UI also means that it's harder to create sounds from scratch. It's harder to sound design on because it requires more menu diving or using the companion app. More about that later. And here we have the two synths side by side, Cobalt 8, Element One. And as you can see, the Cobalt 8 has a very crowded interface, and it also relies on a lot of shift functions to access things here. And instead on Element One, you have all the controls on one row here, but there are fewer controls and there's no shift functionality. So if you want to get to some of the deeper parameters, you'll have to go into the menu to set that up. For example, there are no quick functions to set up an LFO to modulate something. And even though there's less knobs and buttons on the Element One, there are actually 4 assignable knobs, so you can assign them to pretty much anything on the synth that you want to control, which is kind of nice. Beside the new design, there's also a couple of hardware improvements that the community has wished for quite a long time. On the Argon, Cobalt and Carbon 8 synthesizers, the knobs didn't really feel that good. A lot of people were complaining about that, and that has actually been fixed on the Element One, with the knobs now offering much more resistance when you turn them. A weak output level was also something that people complained about on the previous synths, and now it's actually much stronger on the Element One, and I definitely noticed that difference. While the knobs on the Element One does feel a lot better than on the previous model synths, the overall build quality is not as good. The front plate is metal, but the rest of the synth is plastic. It's a much lighter synth than the Argon, Cobalt and Carbon, and while the keys feel good, they aren't the same high quality Fatar keybed as on their larger siblings. So while you could kill a zombie with the Cobalt 8, you will quickly become a zombie if you try it with the Element 1. And a nifty feature is that there's actually a VESA mount on the back of the unit. In terms of the I/O, we have a power button, we have DIN MIDI and USB-C. USB-C is for data transfer, not audio. We have sync in and out, we have audio in, there's expression and sustain pedal inputs, as well as the stereo outputs and headphones output. So one of the ideas behind Element One seems to be a more streamlined and more user-friendly physical interface. So if we take a quick look here, we have our joystick over here. The actual feel of the joystick doesn't feel quite as good as on the previous models, but it's all right. And then we have octave up and down. Then we have the LFO section with speed control. Control over depth and shape. And just like on the Cobalt 8, there are 3 LFOs that we can switch between by pressing this button here. And then we come to the oscillator section. We have pitch control, parameter A and parameter B. And here's one of the things that sets the modal synths apart. So basically, each of the 2 oscillators can have one algorithm loaded, and the algorithm decides what parameter B and parameter A does. And this can vary widely, from pulse width modulation to just shaping the wave to doing all kinds of amplitude modulation and I think phase distortion. And yeah, there's just a ton of things that can be done depending on what sort of algorithm you're loading. And then we have the parameter and value knobs that you use to scroll the menus. So if I want to change, for example, something about the keyboard, I'll use this knob here to scroll through the menu. And I'll use this knob here to turn stuff on and off or increase or decrease values. And then you have the category button. Here you can select up to 3 different tags for your presets, which makes finding the right presets much easier. And speaking about presets, there are multiple banks of them. And like with many of the modal synths, I think we have 3 banks here, A, B, and C of presets. And like on most modal synths, there are just a ton of really, really useful sounds in here. And then we have the filter section. I think there are up to 34 different filters. And with the morph knob, you can morph them, morph the shape, and you have resonance control. Sometimes the morph knob instead controls the drive. And when it comes to the sound of the filter, I think it's one of the best sounding digital filters on the market right now. And just the sheer variety of filters makes a huge difference. And then we have the envelope section here with the attack, decay, sustain, release controls. You can select between a filter and amp. There's also a third envelope, which is in the menus. And you can use the app also to assign this envelope to control something. This is the same on the Cobalt 8. And if we press 3 times, we have these assignable controls. This is new for the Element One, and they are actually quite useful. So I've set up the first one here to control the balance between the 2 oscillators. And I also like to set up 3 of them to control the wet and dry mix of the effects, because as you can see, there are no controls for the effects. So the effects are actually found in the menu. So there are 3 effects, effects 1, 2, and 3. So beyond reverbs, delays, and chorus and flanger type stuff, you have compressor, you have drive, for example. And then we have the arpeggiator section with a tempo knob setting the BPM and on and off. And if you hold down the button, you can input notes. So what is it like using Element One in practice? And how does it differ from, say, the Cobalt 8 or any of the other older modal synthesizers? I would say it's definitely leaning more towards the musicians than the sound designers. But what I found fun and that I think could be appealing to a lot of people is basically using it like you would a micro Korg, not the micro Korg 2, but the older one. So on the old micro Korg, you would rarely make patches from scratch. I mean, some daring adventurers would, but most people would just use it for presets and tweak the presets a bit. And I think that that is exactly what Element One is about, unless you're using the companion app. And I think that's totally fine, because not every synth needs to be for the sound designer. So you could hear, I went from this sound to this by just tweaking a few knobs. So this far into the video, you might think that you can't sound design on the Element One, but this is not the case. You can do everything from the hardware itself without the need of a companion app. You just need to go into the menus a bit more. But it's basically the same power as in the Cobalt 8, for example, or in the Argon 8 or in the Carbon 8. It's very, very similar in terms of what you can do on the actual hardware. But when you actually use the companion app, it opens up the synth a lot more. It becomes definitely easier to sound design on it. So let me just show you how to create a sound from scratch with the Element One and the companion app. And I do believe that the app is available for Windows, Mac, iPadOS, iOS, and Android. So if you're new to modal synths, the app might seem confusing, but it's not too bad. First, we go up here and press Init to initialize the preset. Now, the first part of the synth that we need to have a look at is the oscillator section. And we can access it on the hardware itself also by simply turning the knob here, going to oscillator, pressing it again, and here we can select the algorithm. And as you can see, it changes in the application as well. And like I said earlier, when you choose an algorithm, this defines what parameter A and B does, and it will wildly change what kind of sound you can make. So for example, for the first oscillator here, we're selecting PWM Dual. A gnarly sounding pulse width modulated square wave. We can also detune it. And you can detune in musical intervals. So in order to set up Nick Bat's favorite thing, pulse width modulation, we have to modulate this knob here. And that's a good opportunity to actually take a look at the modulation section. So down here we have 8 slots for creating modulation, so we can just select LFO number 1 here, and we can assign it. So let's send it to parameter A. And on the synth itself, we have basically all the controls we need to change the LFO, so we can change, for example, what kind of wave shape we have. And if we don't like the sound of this, we can just try a different algorithm. So on this algorithm, we have both a saw sound and some pulse width modulation. And we're still using an LFO here to control it. And in order to get a little bit more of an analog sound, we have the vintage parameter that we can turn up, and then we have drift that we can turn up. So if I have drift all the way up, you hear how it gets quite detuned. Now let's get back to the hardware a bit. So we have the amp envelope over here. We can shape it to whatever curve we want. And we have the filter envelope as well. So let's introduce that. And in order to hear it a bit more, we're gonna shape the filter as well. And you can do it from the unit itself. So in the Element One app, we have the filter section over here. Here we can also change how the filter responds. Here we can also change the type of filter. I found this state variable filter, which I quite like, so I'm going to use that. And we're going to turn on some effects. So you press the effects tab here. So got a reverb, chorus, and ping pong delay. Gonna tweak the filter envelope a little bit more. Maybe the amp envelope just a little bit, and then we can So this is just with one oscillator. I want to bring in the second oscillator, the second algorithm. So here we have the virtual analog algorithm. We can shape the wave. And parameter B lets us detune it. And we can bring in the first waveform. But we clearly need some more modulation. So if we go here to the modulation tab, you can see we have LFO1, LFO2, and 3, and also the third envelope, which we could use for something. So let's use the third envelope to modulate the shape of the second oscillator. And let's set up LFO2 to modulate the detuning of oscillator 2. And I'm also turning up the width parameter, which is the stereo width. Let's add some more vintage. I've tuned up the first oscillator, 12 semitones, and I've played around a bit with the filter and the amp envelope and basically everything we've done using the application you can do in the menus of the synthesizer. For example, setting up a mod, you go to mod slot number 1, you go here to source, no source, and then you select, for example, LFO number 1 here, you click it, and then we select the destination, filter cutoff, and then we increase the depth. And you can't really hear anything because it's a sine wave, so let's change it. So now, we've set up a modulation. So basically everything is in here, but you will need to dive into the menu quite a bit if you want to sound design only using the hardware. But using it with the app, it's actually a quite smooth experience. So let me end today's video with a summary of some pros and cons. Firstly, I think that the design is beautiful. You can totally see Axel putting a lot of effort into it, so that's a big plus. It also sounds great, just like the Cobalt 8 did. Not really a surprise, but it is a great sounding synthesizer. Keyboard itself, while it's not the same Fatar keypad as on the previous models, it still feels good. It's not a bad keypad at all. It's just not up there with the Fatar keypad, but it's still good. The improvements to the knobs were very welcome. It's something I have been complaining about for a long time, so I'm very happy to see that. And having the output of the unit, the audio output, being much stronger, it's a big step in the right direction for Modal. Oh, and I almost forgot, I really like the new assignable controls. I think that's actually brilliant to have 4 knobs that can just assign to whatever, and that does add a lot because it makes it so you can set them to whatever it is you want to have access to that are in the menus, and suddenly you have a knob for it instead. So it definitely makes the workflow a lot better. Now, when it comes to negatives, I've already touched on some of them. Firstly, that it's not great for sound design. You can sound design on it, you can do everything on the unit itself, but it's just not great for it. The Cobalt 8 or Carbon 8 is a much better synth if you want to do heavy sound design work. And this leads me to another negative, and that is that you have to go into the menus quite a bit if you want to access something that there isn't a dedicated knob for. Sure, you have the 4 assignable knobs, so you can assign them to pretty much anything. But if you want, for example, to assign an LFO to something, you have to go into the menu and do that. And here I'm just wondering, again, could they have used a shift button or use any of the other buttons in combination with LFOs to let us quickly assign the LFOs to something? I'm not sure. I'm just kind of, I'm wondering, like, is this the right choice not to have any of those quick functions? So I think what Modal should do is listen to the feedback, and if people want more quick functions, like quick assigning an LFO to something, setting up a modulation quickly, maybe they can do it with any of the buttons, like using, for example, the select button. If you hold it down for a long time on the LFO section, then you can assign the LFOs to something. Maybe some combination like that could work. So yeah. And another negative is that there's no poly aftertouch, and I think more and more of us are getting used to having poly aftertouch on our synthesizers. But my overall verdict is that I think that this is a pretty good synthesizer. It sounds good. I understand sort of what they're going for here with a musician first kind of synthesizer and sound designer second synthesizer, and it feels like they're back in the game. I'm glad to see that Modal are putting out synths again, and they also seem to have listened to a lot of the feedback, so I'm sure if there are problems with the synth that needs to be addressed, they can do so. So overall, I'm happy with the direction that Modal are going with Element One. And if you are like me, you want a synthesizer that is more sound design focused, I do think that we'll see more synths like that in the future. I don't know what they have cooking, but I'm pretty sure that we will see more advanced synthesizers in the future as well. So hope you have a great day. Talk to you all later.